"It's all right," Second said. Fawn tried to speak, but no sound would come out. I'm sorry," she said, finally. Second shook his head, smiling. "If you could save me, you would. I love you." Fawn could hear compartments further down were being smashed together. Each one sounded like a giant had lost his footing. Second looked over his shoulder as another one crushed close by. He looked back to Fawn and tried to free himself from her grip. Then he shoved Fawn as hard as he could back into the vestige. Fawn was nearly horizontal as she flew backwards. She watched as her apartment was crumpled before her. The vestige took hold of her limbs and stuffed her into its gray folds. Fortunate that she saw that Second was still whole before she was tossed through. After a long fall, Fawn was wrenched from the other side, and as she looked around, she could tell it was from here where all dimensions were spun. This dreary, chaotic world would define hell for anyone who saw it. The sky was torn open, bleeding ash and acidic rain on broken monuments and relics of societies that ended billions of years ago. This wet gray land was an endless valley, shielded by mountains which no bird or machine could ever hope to fly over. It was the half-world, one of many, dark and alien. Its existence seemed to defy the laws of reason. At the corners of her mouth were freshly healed gashes from where her cheeks had split to attack genocide. Her hot pink hair had faded to a dull tea-rose, and her violet eyes had turned to a deep gray. Her skin had darkened considerably, as if she had suffered through a few applications of varnish. Her mind felt crowded by some other. Unlike before, the vestige had flooded her with a rambling audience of know-it-alls and deviants, but now they spoke in uniform. Her vestige peeked over her shoulder and peered at the side of her face. It blew an icy mist against her cheek. Fawn's eyes crept to the corners and watched as its jagged mouth worked, silent, but speaking loudly in her mind. Though she could understand its alien speak, Fawn was unsure of the creature's intentions. She had nothing left to give. Just then, familiar thoughts surged into her mind. From somewhere far away, she felt she could hear Second speaking. She could barely understand his words, but knew the message. "If you could save me, you would," was what she remembered him saying before he shoved her away. It was in this moment that Fawn wished she had died in his arms. She had betrayed her ideals. To her, human existence was not about cowardly clutching to the ankles of life, but being remembered with a regretful sigh by those that did. She hated the slack-skinned decrepit, who were too afraid to die, miserly bribing death to sit in their stuffy, mold-choked houses for another day. From the incessant chattering of her vestige, another set of voices peeled off. It was Letchway, with her usual nagging, and Alpha talking about some stupid contraption he had bought. Fawn shook her head and lay down in the grass. Some moments later, Fletchett pushed her way through the noise, but Fawn was not in the mood for the woman's cold and practical advice. She wanted to take it all back, everything that came with it. The misery of another tour into war, her shaky leadership position on the Nazareth, even the alienations he had experienced inside the Yola pile. As the vestige loomed over her, she noticed several objects fall out of its gray ooze. One of them was a firing pin from an EP rifle. Fawn picked it up and turned it over in her hand, and as she read the serial numbers, she realized it could only come from Fletcher's Penny Red. The first two numbers were code for the Dearborn's development team. More and more pieces soon dropped out of the vestige, and then it took hold of them with its gray ribbons, assembling them with humanly impossible precision. When it was complete, it hefted all of the weapons in itself and poured onto Fawn. She struggled to free herself from the pool of ooze she was being smothered with. When her face emerged, she was dressed in a gray coat with numerous layers. She stood up and opened the coat to reveal an organic lining, which held an assortment of weapons, handguns, submachine guns, grenades, and even a Gatling gun. She took hold of one of the handguns. Noticing that even holding all this bulk, she felt remarkably light and streamlined, as none of the weapons showed themselves through the coat. The gun in Fawn's hand seemed ordinary, a standard sidearm that had been issued to their soldiers for decades. She checked the magazine. The color of the bullets looked off, but she shrugged and replaced it back into the magazine chamber. She narrowed her eyes at a tree downrange. She fired at it, noticing the trigger pull was absurdly light. The gun bucked and exploded, tearing away a circular chunk of the tree. She approached and saw that the section of the tree she had knocked off was absent. Not even a splinter showed itself. She had fired countless negation rounds, and knew these could not be them. If they were, the reaction would continue far after. Fawn glanced around herself, taking in the dark sights before her. She could hear the sounds of war pouring over every mountain, screams of demons and warrior princesses. She could sense that there were other vestiges connected to this world, from the one she had just left, and through them all she could sense the abyss, and she knew that the abyss could sense her. It was then that her vestige, Long Arms, twisted around to her front. His large topaz eyes smiled back with warmth that was reflected in her chest. Long Arms growled in his alien tongue that only Fawn could understand, as he had on that strange night when they had finally been introduced. He spoke to her about a circuit that needed completing, and Fawn nodded, knowing that if she did so, she could bring back Second and her friends, for they were not dead, Long Arms told her, just lost, for it was difficult to consider anyone truly dead in the half-worlds.